My stepmother is furious because I threw away the gift she gave me before I left the house. But now my father is angry because I'm telling everyone that he had something to do with my mother's cancellation of life. Hello everyone, I, an 18-year-old, want to share something that happened to me recently. And I really need your opinion because I'm quite confused and overwhelmed with emotions. I have changed some details to preserve my privacy. First, let me give you a bit of context so you can better understand the situation. My mother died when I was only 8 years old. It was a tragedy that happened in the most absurd and painful way. My parents went out to dinner one night because they were celebrating their anniversary, though they didn't go to the usual place. It was a rather fancy restaurant, something they didn't often do. My mother ordered a dish without knowing it contained an ingredient she was allergic to, as it was her favorite dish and she often ordered it when we went out to eat. It was actually a pretty common dish, but it was prepared differently, which didn't make her suspect what was happening. The reaction was quick and fatal. Despite the efforts of the restaurant staff and the doctors, they couldn't save her. My father was devastated. He lost the love of his life in the blink of an eye. I remember that just hours before they left, she had kissed me on the forehead and promised they would be back in time to say goodnight. I still remember that as if it were yesterday, because all the trauma fixed that memory in my mind. The only good thing about all that is that it is a good memory, so at least it comforts me. That night, I stayed with a babysitter, and it wasn't until the next morning that I was woken up very early and told about the news. My father didn't want to wake me up at night to tell me because he returned from the hospital very late, and partly because he was a mess. 2 months after my mother passed away, my father brought his new girlfriend to live with us. She wasn't someone new in his life. She had been his friend before my mother passed away. Although he never said it explicitly, I felt their relationship had started long before my mother died. Though this is just my assumption, something I'll never be able to prove. They got married within the next 6 months. It was very strange that in such a short time my father found someone new and was married to that person before the year of my mother's passing. From there, my relationship with my father began to sour, and it continued to do so over things that happened until I left home at 18. From the moment my stepmother moved in, everything changed. Everything that belonged to my mother was packed into boxes and taken to the basement. My father said it was too painful for him to see her things every day. And my stepmother, though she never said it directly, didn't seem comfortable with my mother's memories in the house. It was as if they were trying to erase any trace of her existence. I remember once some distant relatives visited and brought some photos of my mother. They were photos I had never seen before, and they made me very happy. I decided to put some of them in my room in a little corner I had decorated with much love and care. But when my father discovered the photos, he got furious. We had a big fight. He said I was being selfish, digging into old wounds that needed to heal. I, on the other hand, felt that he was trying to erase my mother completely, as if she had never existed. After that fight, our relationship was never the same. In the following years, my relationship with my father deteriorated. My stepmother tried to get close to me, but I always felt her affection was forced, as if she was trying to replace my mother. I never managed to accept her. Besides, she used to say bad things about my mother, as if she were trying to replace her or something. Some things I remember are, I know your mother wasn't very good at cleaning the house, but we could do those things together, mother and daughter. At that moment, I think I was about 10 years old, so I didn't pay much attention and just looked for an excuse not to spend time with her. So I would say I had homework, or that I was going to play with a neighbor. But as I grew older, I realized that not only was she trying to replace my mother, but she wanted to use me as a servant. This idea of wanting me as a servant didn't continue to happen, only a couple of times. There were also times when she wanted to go shopping with me, saying, "We can dress alike like mother and daughter." As for my father, the relationship was always tense since he made me take down the photos of my mother. Later on, he even took the boxes with my mother's belongings to a storage unit or threw them away. I never found out what happened to them because whenever I brought up the subject, he would shut me down, which made our relationship worse. I didn't become a rebel or anything like that. But every day, our conversations became shorter and colder. I also remember a birthday, I think it was when I turned 15 or 16, that my father organized a dinner for me. My stepmother was also there. But I already had plans at my uncle's house, my mother's brother, where some friends were also going to attend. My father was very angry that day because I was leaving without telling him. I told him I could stay if he gave me back the photos and the boxes with my mother's belongings. He got furious, so I hurried to the door and left. When I arrived at my uncle's house, I told them what had happened, so when my father called later to ask if I was there, since he didn't know where I had gone or where I was going to celebrate my birthday, my uncle told him I was going to have my party there and would return later. But fast forward to the present, where the day finally arrived when I left the house to live with some friends and start studying and working. It was a bittersweet moment. I was excited about my new life, but there was also a sense of emptiness in leaving behind everything I knew, no matter how dysfunctional it was. It's not that I missed my home or my family, but in the city, I had friends and some relatives from my mother's side of the family with whom I liked to spend time because I could talk about her and hear anecdotes. The day I moved out, my stepmother called me to the living room and gave me a gift. It was a photo album. When I opened it, I found photos from my childhood, many from when my mother was still alive, though none were of my mother, just me and others from the following years, my father and stepmother. Felt weird because they had not only erased the entire part of my life with my mother, but it seemed like they wanted to be a family where my mother never existed. So before leaving, I threw the photo album in the trash. I didn't say anything, just threw it away and left. It didn't take long for my father to call me, furious. I hadn't yet left the city because I went to a friend's house since we were all going to leave together to our new city. We were traveling by car, though it was our departure point. While we were loading things like it was a game of Tetris, I received my father's call. He told me my stepmother was very sad that she had worked hard on that gift for me, and he couldn't believe I had been so inconsiderate. He told me I was cruel, that I didn't understand how difficult it had been for everyone, especially for him to move on after my mother's death. I hung up. I didn't know what to say. I felt a mix of sadness and rage. This had been the same pattern of my father since my mother's death, and I didn't want to tolerate it anymore. I had to endure it all this time because I lived in his house. But now that I was independent, it's good to be able to say goodbye to all this. Luckily, I don't need his money to live now since I've been saving up with jobs I've been doing, along with some money that my uncle and grandparents have given me. It's not much, but it's enough to get to my new city and live for a few months, at least until I find a job there. My friends are also helping me, but in any case, I decided to post here for advice and to ask if I've been in the wrong. Edit. I just wanted to add that, since I moved into my new apartment, I've been able to hang some photos of my mother in my room. Some relatives helped me get new copies of those photos my father took away years ago. Seeing them every day gives me a peace I can't describe and makes me feel that somehow she's still here with me. Update 1. I want to thank everyone who has supported me and told me that I'm not the bad one in this situation. Many of you even mentioned that you would have done something more drastic. Burning the album, which is certainly a very good idea, makes me feel bad, as I can't believe I hadn't thought of that before. In any case, your words have made me feel understood and validated, especially by those who have shared that they've also lost their mothers. Their stories have moved me a lot. I also want to clarify some things that perhaps weren't clear in my original post. Despite the problems I had with my father and stepmother, my father was never really abusive, so there was no need for me to leave home beyond some unfortunate comments, so to speak, from my stepmother. My father didn't treat me badly on a daily basis. The main problem was that he didn't allow me to have my mother's things, which was painful, but didn't amount to abuse or mistreatment. Part of me believes that he really loves me, and this isn't a defense of my father. I feel very good being away from him, but it wasn't like he treated me badly or deprived me of anything. My problem with him, and what drove us apart, was the fact that he always wanted to keep me away from the memory of my mother. This might have to do with a comment someone made, which I'll talk about later in this post. I also want to clarify that, although I mentioned my uncle and grandparents, they wouldn't have been able to take care of me. My uncle lives alone and wasn't in a position to take care of a child. He doesn't have a great place to receive me, nor a great job. When it was my birthday party, it was my grandparents and a couple of close friends. Even my uncle made a great effort to celebrate my party though I'll be eternally grateful to him. My grandparents, on the other hand, are quite old. They are now 91 and 89 years old, so it would have been very difficult for them to take care of me when I was younger. Finally, I want to address a comment that has made me think. Someone suggested that my father might have had something to do with my mother's death. At first, I thought it was a crazy idea, but then I started to mull it over. As far as I know, my father chose the restaurant for the anniversary dinner. He could have known that my mother's favorite dish contained the ingredient she was allergic to. It's a disturbing idea, and I don't want to believe that my father could go that far. However, I can't help but have these doubts in my mind now that someone has planted the seed. I know it's a very serious accusation, and I have no proof of anything. Probably just my mind trying to find explanations for a senseless tragedy. But I can't help wondering if there's more to this story that I'm not seeing. Again, thank you all for your support and advice. Update 2. A few things have happened since my last update, and I need to vent. For starters, my father decided it was a good idea to bombard me with messages. Apparently, both he and my stepmother expected me to call them to apologize for the photo album, which, I think is obvious, wasn't going to happen. My stepmother even mentioned that she could send me the album by mail if I wanted it. I told them they could send me my mother's things instead, and my father got even angrier because he said that my stepmother had made a nice gesture for me, and all I did was reject her. I don't know. Maybe I'm the bad one here, but I honestly don't think there's anything wrong with asking for my mother's things, because I certainly want to have them with me. I find it disturbing that my father doesn't want to give me all those things. So I told him that either he sends me my mother's things, or he can forget about me. He protested back that he wasn't going to do that because it would be too painful to be near those things and send them, so I finally blocked him. But that's not the end of this update, because what I did next may have been drastic depending on whom you ask. But I was very angry with him, because he won't even let me keep my mother's things, especially now that I no longer live in his house. So I made a thread on Twitter. There I explained how my stepmother and father tried to replace my mother, and how they won't even let me have her thing. A friend I live with read the draft before I posted it and suggested some changes. Initially, I was going to say quite directly that I believed my father might have had something to do with my mother's death. My friend said that if I had no proof, I could get sued for defamation. So I deleted that part and just said it indirectly. I implied that it seemed very strange to me that my father had replaced my mother so quickly and with a friend he had known beforehand. I also mentioned the fact that they made so much effort for my stepmother to take on the role of my mother in my life. I want to clarify that I wouldn't have minded if my stepmother had been close to me. It's not a case of not wanting her, because she's not my mother. What has bothered me all my life is that they tried to replace her by literally removing my mother's things as if she never existed. She could have been my stepmother and had a good relationship with me, but while still keeping my mother's memories. So my post has been online for about 30 minutes now. I hope that at least other people who know my family can see what my father has done. Update 3. Wow, things have gotten out of control faster than I expected. My post on Twitter has garnered much more attention than I anticipated. Many people have started speculating in the comments about the possibility that my father might have had something to do with my mother's death. I want to clarify that I never made that accusation directly. I only presented the facts as I know them, but it's good that some people have added up the facts and come to the same conclusion. Things got even more intense when my uncle called me. Apparently, my father contacted him, demanding that he make me delete the post, claiming that what I was saying was very serious. He even proposed sending me my mother's things in exchange for me deleting it. But my uncle, who has always been my defender, told my father that I hadn't said anything explicitly, that I had only presented the facts, and that he shouldn't call him again. In fact, his exact words were, "Don't call me again, because the next time I see you, I might punch you in the face." To give you an idea, my uncle works in construction and is a big guy, though also a bit broad, but still, he's not someone you want to mess with. I'm grateful to have him on my side in all this. We've talked a bit, and he wasn't aware of the post or the theory, though he was quite angry with my father about this. I told him to calm down because I didn't want to lose another important person in my life. He promised to do so. I don't think my uncle is capable of doing anything so drastic, but he was very angry. But it doesn't end there. I decided to call the police station in my city to ask about my mother's case. To my surprise, they told me that a detective would call me soon to talk to me. I don't know what to expect from this conversation, but I'm nervous and anxious at the same time. This whole situation is getting bigger than I imagined when I made that post. I just wanted to get advice and an answer about my stepmother's photo album. Update 4. There is a lot to say in this update, which will be the last one. Yes, it will be the last one, because all of this is very painful for me at the moment, and I suppose you'll understand when you read it. I'll start by saying that I have recovered my mother's things. In all this time that has passed, since it's been more than a month since the last time I was here, I was waiting for the detective's call, but the "he will call soon" wasn't as true as I imagined. Finally, he called me 2 days ago. I've been processing everything until today and decided to update, so as not to leave my story without closure, although the situation is too painful to continue with more updates. First of all, having my mother's belongings makes me feel a little better. Even as I write this, I'm wearing a sweater that was hers. It's comforting to have her close, even if only through something she once wore. I've also recovered photos from when I was a child, from when we went to the park or on vacation, that sort of thing. There are photos with my father, but I've kept them stored away because seeing them now is very painful. In exchange, I had to delete my post. That was the condition my father set to send me the boxes with my mother's things. It's not something I wanted to do, but I wanted even more to have her belongings. Besides, nothing stops me from making another post in the future if I consider it necessary. He also sent me the photo album from my stepmother, along with a note from her. Another attempt to manipulate me to get closer to me. In the note, she said she was hurt because she could never find a way to get close to me, that I was too submerged in the memory of my mother, and that I didn't give her a chance. I burned the note along with the album and threw the ashes in the trash. I want to clarify that I did give her a chance. Although I found it strange that my father had a new girlfriend so soon, when I was 8 years old, I didn't think about infidelity or things like that. My concerns were my friends, cartoons, and some other childish nonsense. My problems with her began when she tried to pass herself off as my mother and started making passive-aggressive comments about her. Until that moment, I was cordial with her, like with anyone you've just met, which was practically true, even though she was my father's friend before that. I had barely seen her once, I think, at a party my parents organized at home. They invited people from work. I even say, "I think," because I don't remember much of that. It's just something I know because my stepmother mentioned once if I remembered that party. I clarify this because I've seen a comment saying that I'm the bad one for not giving my stepmother a chance. Many responded below that it was a troll, but I think that person only read the title and didn't bother to read my story. Anyway, I spoke with the detective 2 days ago, and the news isn't good. He told me that he was in charge of my mother's case when it happened, although everything indicated an accident. They usually investigate it, even if only for bureaucratic reason. He apologized for not calling sooner, as he had to look for and review the case files. and he's been busy with other current cases. He told me that he went to the restaurant and talked to the people who worked there. Both those who serve the public and the cooks. Everyone said that the dish had always been prepared with that ingredient, and there was no reason to think the restaurant tried to harm my mother. They also explained that when the day's menu is published, they usually use the dish's name, and unless customers mention that they are allergic to an ingredient, they don't usually make changes. The detective also spoke with my father, and his version of the events is that he didn't think the dish could have that ingredient, though he didn't make any clarification about it. That day, there were only 2 menus available, and he knew my mother would order that dish when he made the reservation, so he didn't see the need to make any warning. In conclusion, the detective said that the case was resolved as an accident and hasn't been investigated further since then. There is no evidence to incriminate my father or anyone else because, according to the detective, there is no evidence. I tried to tell him that I suspected my father, but he explained that even though it might seem suspicious, it's not enough to blame him for something like that. It's not as if the dish didn't have that ingredient and someone deliberately added it. Simply, my father didn't inform the restaurant about the allergy, and it all ended in tragedy. There's no way to prove that he even knew about the ingredient, since no one at the restaurant remembers seeing him before. So there's no way to prove it. It's true that my father and mother used to go to restaurants and order the same dish many times. I know this because my uncle told me since it was her favorite. But at the same time, I can't shake the feeling that this last time my father might have had something to do with it. His new relationship, the choice of restaurant, and the timing are too many coincidences. But there's no way to prove it, and that's what hurts the most. Not only did I lose my mother, but it might not have been a simple accident, and the culprit could have been my own father. It's hard to process all this, so I can't continue making more updates. I hope someone in the comments has ideas to clarify this matter, because I don't have any. Maybe it's just my imagination, and it really was a simple accident, while the relationship with my stepmother was an unfortunate coincidence. But there's something about all this that prevents me from thinking that's possible, and I'm afraid I'll never know the truth. Thank you to everyone who has accompanied and supported me through this process. Edit. Some people have asked if my mother and father had a bad relationship before she passed away, and I can't say I remember anything like that. They had arguments like any other couple. Even my father and stepmother had similar arguments when I lived there. At least I don't remember anything that made me think my mother suspected infidelity or that my father could do something like what I suspect. He never hit or physically abused her, at least that I was aware of. I even asked my uncle about this, and he agrees with me.